When a human meets an alien, will love overcome the impossible? What if one day, love didn't come from your heart, but from a distant star far beyond your reach? Could you love a being not of your own kind, or would love be torn apart by differences that seem insurmountable? It was on a stormy night when I received a strange message. It wasn't from anyone I knew, but from a place I couldn't understand. And that's where this love story began, forging a connection between me and an alien from another world. In the endless expanse of the cosmos, two worlds don't collide through radio waves or signals, but through a love that cannot be defined. Could we build a bridge between hearts, despite the vast distance that divides us? When I first met him, I thought it was just a coincidence. But the truth was, he wasn't human. He came from a planet millions of light years away. Could our love defy the very laws of the universe? Let's find out, together. Stay with me throughout this video, as there's more to discover than meets the eye. I promise, by the end, you'll understand just how much the story has to offer. This is only the beginning of a journey that you won't want to miss. The sky of the planet Ulaan'Vea is unlike anything humans have ever seen. Instead of a single sun, Ulaan'Vea is illuminated by 3 stars, a bright orange one, a mysterious blue star, and a faint purple star. Together, they create a magical light that causes the atmosphere to always shift, from shimmering golden afternoons to mysterious deep purple nights. This is a beautiful yet dangerous world, home to mysterious creatures that exist in harsh environments beyond human imagination. Evelyn Carter, an astronaut from Earth, was assigned to survey and collect data about this planet, one that had never been extensively explored. But when she landed on Ulaan'Vea's surface, everything she imagined about the mission began to change. Something bigger, something she couldn't explain, had begun to stir within her. Ulaan'Vea is not just an alien planet, but the home of an extraterrestrial civilization, beings unlike humans but possessing intelligence and power far beyond anything Evelyn had ever known. The Qatari are humanoid creatures, tall with skin that glows like metallic shimmering. They are not just scientifically advanced, they possess the ability to manipulate light and energy in ways no human civilization could ever understand. The Qatari live a life they believe to be in harmony with the universe, a life beyond the comprehension of those from Earth. Evelyn stands in the towering city of Ulaan'Vea, a city unlike anything she has ever seen. The buildings glow like enormous mirrors, reflecting the 3-colored sky above. Beneath her feet, the ground is soft and glows eerily, as if it is alive, in harmony with the nature around it. But as she enters one of the radiant buildings, where she is about to meet one of the Qatari leaders, a shiver runs through her. How could a species like this exist in such a world? And why does she feel such a powerful attraction from them, as if she is facing a force she cannot control? The answer comes to her as the door opens. A Qatari man walks in, tall with metallic shimmering skin under the light of the 3 stars. He wears a magical armor covered in symbols and drawings Evelyn cannot read. But what astonishes her is not his armor or his alien appearance, it's his eyes. His bright, star-like eyes that make Evelyn feel an intense pull, something deep and inexplicable. "You are Evelyn Carter, right?" he says, his voice deep and smooth but with an undeniable authority. "Yes," Evelyn replies, trying to remain calm, though her voice trembles slightly as she meets his gaze. "Welcome to Ulaan'Vea," he says, offering a subtle smile filled with unspoken meaning. "I am Asher, the one who will guide you on this journey. But you are not just a visitor. You are part of something greater, and I sense that you are ready for it." Evelyn is taken aback, unable to look away from his eyes. There is something about them that makes her feel like she is not just looking at an alien, but at the beginning of a story, a part of a strange, magical flow she could never have imagined. She can't explain this feeling, but she knows that everything will change from this moment on. Evelyn feels an irresistible pull toward Asher, one that she cannot explain. Despite being on a distant, foreign planet, she feels a strange connection with Asher, one that goes beyond mere attraction. It's as if an invisible force is drawing her toward him. Asher notices this immediately. He watches Evelyn intently, his silver eyes flashing with a knowing yet powerful gaze. The Qatari are entirely different from humans, not just in appearance, but in their mental and physical prowess. Asher is one of the few with the ability to communicate with intangible beings in the universe, supernatural forces that Evelyn is just beginning to feel. "Evelyn," Asher begins, his voice low and intimate, as if saying something he doesn't want her to fully understand yet. "I feel the attraction between us. But it's not just simple curiosity, is it? It's something deeper. There's something in the air, in the light of the three stars, that makes us unavoidable." Evelyn struggles to suppress her emotions, but Asher's words make her heart race. She knows that what he says is not a coincidence. Their connection is not by chance. There is something bigger calling them. Did you feel it as soon as we met?" Evelyn asks, her voice trembling, though she tries to remain calm. Asher doesn't answer immediately. Instead, he steps closer to her, making the space around them seem smaller and quieter. His metallic skin reflects the mysterious purple light, creating an eerie yet captivating aura. Asher is not just an alien, he carries a power beyond anything Evelyn could ever imagine. "It's not just me who feels it, Evelyn," Asher replies, his eyes glowing with absolute confidence. "We both feel it. And no one can stop it. We are not two separate beings in this universe, we are two halves of a greater whole, a force so vast that neither of us can fully understand." The closeness between them becomes more intense. The subtle scent of Asher's body, sweet like the plants on Ulaan'Vea but with a strange, unfamiliar taste, fills Evelyn's senses. His presence is a mix of strength and softness, like he could easily blend with the universe. Evelyn cannot resist the pull. Though she tries to maintain the professionalism of an astronaut, she cannot control her body in front of Asher. The attraction between them is too powerful to ignore. And then, in that strange moment, Asher steps closer. His hand gently reaches out, his long fingers brushing a strand of hair from her face. Evelyn's skin tingles at the touch, gentle yet full of power, as if he can read her every emotion without a single word. "Don't be afraid," Asher whispers, his voice seeming to echo in Evelyn's mind. "This attraction isn't a bad thing. It's just a part of the universe, a part of us. We can't fight it. And I will not let you feel alone." His words bring a strange peace to Evelyn. Though she still has doubts about the risks and uncertainties of this relationship, the anxiety fades as she listens to his voice. She looks into Asher's eyes, feeling a sweetness rise within her. It's undeniable at this moment, they have forged a powerful, inseparable connection, transcending the limits between humans and extraterrestrials. From that moment on, Evelyn and Asher became companions on this turbulent journey. Asher guided Evelyn through the most magical parts of Ulaan'Vea. The breathtaking landscapes, the majestic cities of the Qatari, where structures of light and life blend in perfect harmony. Each step Asher took made Evelyn feel like she was lost in a new world, one of light and possibilities she had never dreamed of. Though she was studying an entirely new civilization, her relationship with Asher only deepened her curiosity. Was this a strange connection, or was it part of something the universe had set in motion long ago? The growing intensity between them was not just an emotional connection but also the convergence of extraordinary forces. While Evelyn felt her understanding of the universe expanding, she also began to sense the tension, coming from both Asher and herself. Night fell, and Ulaan'Vea became even more mysterious. The light from the three stars reflected on the shimmering mountains, and Evelyn found herself standing next to Asher in a quiet space. "How do you feel?" Asher asked, his voice echoing softly in the silence. "It's incredible," Evelyn sighed, feeling a harmony between herself and this alien world. "Every moment feels like a step closer to something greater. But also, so full of risk." Asher didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer, gazing into Evelyn's eyes with deep empathy. His shimmering metallic skin approached her, as if part of the universe were overtaking her. The connection between them was undeniable. "Don't worry about the future," he whispered. "Sometimes, the connections we can't explain lead us to the greatest things." And again, in the closeness of that moment, they continued on a journey unlike any other one that would not only explore the universe, but also themselves. As Evelyn and Asher continued their journey across the mysterious planet of Ulaan'Vea, the space between them seemed to shrink with each passing day. Their connection, stronger than anything Evelyn had ever felt, was undeniable. It wasn't just an intellectual bond forged through shared curiosity, there was a deep, almost primal attraction that pulsed between them like a living, breathing thing. It was in the way Asher's silver eyes seemed to look through her, as if he could peer into the very depths of her soul, and in the warmth of his presence, which made the cold alien world around them feel suddenly intimate. But Evelyn, despite the magnetic pull, still wrestled with her own internal turmoil. She was supposed to be here to explore and document the wonders of this alien world, to maintain objectivity and professionalism. But every moment spent with Asher felt like she was slipping further from that purpose. His allure was impossible to resist. His voice, a melodic, almost hypnotic cadence, seemed to wrap around her, drawing her closer to him. His touch, though subtle, left a trail of fire on her skin, making it hard for her to focus on anything else. One evening, as they sat together in a secluded garden, surrounded by bioluminescent plants that cast a soft, eerie glow, Evelyn couldn't suppress the longing she felt any longer. She had been trying to push the growing tension away, to tell herself that their connection was nothing more than a fleeting moment of cosmic coincidence. But here, now, in the tranquil silence of the garden, it was impossible to ignore. "I feel it, too," Asher's voice broke through her thoughts, low and intimate. "The pull between us. The connection. It's not just your mind, Evelyn. It's your body that responds, too. Her heart skipped a beat at his words. She couldn't deny it anymore. Every part of her was drawn to him, her body, her mind, her soul. She felt like she was standing on the edge of something immense and unfamiliar, a precipice from which she might not return. She swallowed hard, trying to steady her breath. I don't know what to do with this, Evelyn admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. It's too much. The way you look at me, the way you touch me. It's all too overwhelming. Asher's eyes darkened, a flicker of understanding passing between them. You don't have to do anything. You just have to let yourself feel it. Let yourself be. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat as he moved closer, his presence overwhelming and yet comforting at the same time. His silver eyes locked with hers, and she could feel the pull intensifying, like gravity itself was bending around them, drawing them together. She could feel the heat radiating off him, even through the cold alien air. And then, in one fluid motion, Asher cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently brushing over her skin. His touch was both delicate and firm, sending a shiver down her spine. Evelyn's body responded before her mind could catch up. She leaned into his touch, feeling her pulse quicken, her body yearning for his. Her breath hitched as his lips hovered just above hers, and for a moment, everything else disappeared. It was just him. Just her. And the undeniable attraction between them. When his lips finally met hers, it was like an explosion of sensation, soft at first, as if testing the waters, but quickly turning more intense. She couldn't control the way her body reacted, the way her hands found their way to his broad chest, feeling the muscles ripple beneath his skin. His kiss deepened, and she felt a sense of surrender, as if every fiber of her being was pulling her closer to him, urging her to abandon all restraint. The air around them seemed to hum with energy, the distant stars twinkling above them as if witnessing their intimate moment. Evelyn's heart raced, her senses overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of what was happening between them. She could taste the alien sweetness of his lips, feel the powerful energy radiating from his body. There was no going back now. Whatever this was, whatever it would become, it had taken root deep within her. And there was no escaping it. When they finally pulled away, both of them breathless, Evelyn looked into Asher's eyes. She saw something there, something raw and vulnerable that mirrored the storm raging inside her. I don't know what to say, she whispered. You don't need to say anything, Asher replied, his voice soft yet filled with intensity. This is not about words. This is about us. Together. Evelyn's pulse raced in her chest. She knew that this connection was more than just physical. There was something deeper, something beyond what either of them had expected. She wasn't just discovering an alien world, she was discovering a new part of herself, a part that was irrevocably bound to Asher. And in that moment, as they sat there, sharing a silent understanding, Evelyn knew that the journey ahead would be unlike anything she had ever imagined. In the days that followed their kiss, everything between Evelyn and Asher became more intense. Every glance, every touch, seemed to carry weight. The invisible pull between them was now palpable. They could no longer pretend that their connection was just about the mission, just about their exploration of Ulaan'Vea. No, it was more than that. Evelyn found herself thinking about Asher constantly, her mind consumed with thoughts of him. Her body, too, seemed to have a mind of its own. When he was near, she couldn't focus on anything else. His presence was intoxicating. She caught herself watching him more than she should, her eyes lingering on the lines of his muscular form, the way his skin shimmered beneath the alien sunlight. There was an undeniable attraction between them, and it was becoming impossible to ignore. Asher, too, was struggling with the overwhelming connection. He had never felt this kind of pull toward anyone, not even among his own kind. Evelyn, with her human form and the strange emotions she stirred in him, was unlike anything he had ever encountered. It was both exhilarating and terrifying. One evening, after another day spent exploring the ancient ruins of Ulaan'Vea, Asher took Evelyn to a secluded spot by the ocean, where the bioluminescent waves lapped gently at the shore. The air was thick with the scent of salt and exotic flowers, and the night sky stretched out above them in a blanket of glittering stars. Asher turned to face her, his eyes reflecting the shimmering light of the ocean. "Evelyn," he said softly, his voice filled with a rare vulnerability, "I've never felt anything like this before. Not with anyone." Evelyn's heart skipped a beat at his words. She had felt the same way. But the weight of their connection was becoming harder to carry, especially with the looming threat of the Qatari Council, who had begun to take notice of their growing closeness. She knew that if they didn't find a way to keep their bond under control, they could face consequences they weren't prepared for. "We need to be careful," Evelyn whispered, her voice heavy with concern. This connection between us, it could put us both in danger." Asher stepped closer, his presence overwhelming, yet comforting. "I know the risks," he said, his voice steady. "But some things are worth the risk. And this is something worth fighting for." Evelyn felt the intensity of his words settle deep within her. She knew, in her heart, that he was right. But as they stood there, on the edge of the ocean, the future seemed uncertain. Would their bond survive the challenges ahead? Would they be able to navigate the political turmoil of Ulaan'Vea, and the dangers that lurked in the shadows? One thing was certain, they couldn't deny what they felt for each other any longer. Their bond was stronger than anything they could fight against. With each passing day, Evelyn and Asher's bond only deepened. They found themselves tangled not only in their own desires, but also in the growing political tension on Ulaan'Vea. The Qatari Council, whose members had once been neutral toward the human emissary, had begun to take a more active interest in their relationship. The threat of war between their two civilizations loomed ever closer, and Evelyn knew that their connection could very well be the catalyst for something much larger than they could control. But despite the mounting pressure, the connection between her and Asher was undeniable. Every moment spent with him made her feel more alive than she had ever felt on Earth. His touch, his voice, his presence, all of it consumed her, and she knew, deep down, that she couldn't walk away. However, the future was unclear. Would their love survive the chaos that was about to unfold? Or would their passion become the very thing that tore them apart? As they stood on the precipice of their destiny, Evelyn realized that she wasn't just fighting for her own heart. She was fighting for their future, one where love could bridge the gap between two very different worlds. And she would do anything to protect that love. As the political tensions surrounding Ulaan'Vea continued to rise, Evelyn and Asher found themselves trapped in a whirlwind of forces beyond their control. The Qatari Council had grown suspicious, and their whispers had turned into a growing storm of suspicion and judgment. They had begun to question not only Evelyn's motives for being on Ulaan'Vea but also the undeniable bond that had formed between her and Asher. The relationship they had tried so desperately to keep hidden was now in the open, and the consequences were far more dangerous than they had ever anticipated. Despite the growing risks, Evelyn and Asher couldn't help but find solace in each other. Every stolen moment they shared, every touch, every glance, felt like a precious escape from the growing chaos. But the threat was real. Evelyn had seen the way the council members looked at her, and the fear in their eyes whenever Asher was by her side. They were not just afraid of the human emissary, they were afraid of what her relationship with Asher might mean for the future of Ulaan'Vea. One evening, as the sky above the planet swirled with dark clouds, an ominous sign of the political storm that was quickly approaching, Asher took Evelyn to the sacred caves deep within the mountains of Ulaan'Vea. These caves, ancient and filled with centuries of Zelarian history, had been a place of refuge for his people during times of war. But now, they had become a hiding place, a sanctuary from the prying eyes of the council. "We need to be careful," Asher said, his voice strained with concern as they walked through the narrow passageway, the light of their torches flickering against the stone walls. "The council has begun to question my loyalty. They think our bond is a threat to the entire system." Evelyn nodded, her heart heavy. "I can't help but feel like we're being watched. Like our every move is being tracked. I never thought it would come to this." Asher stopped, turning to face her. His silver eyes glowed in the dim light, filled with a mixture of longing and fear. "It's not just about the council anymore, Evelyn. It's about us. We are caught between two worlds, and I don't know how we can survive if we can't figure out how to balance them." Evelyn reached for his hand, her fingers trembling slightly. The bond between them had only grown stronger over time, but with that strength came the realization that their love could tear them apart. She knew that if they didn't find a way to navigate the storm brewing around them, it might destroy everything they had fought for. "I don't want to lose you, Asher," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "But I'm scared of what the future holds. I don't know if we're strong enough to face what's coming." Asher gently cupped her face, his touch sending a shiver down her spine. "We are stronger than you think, Evelyn. We have something here that is unique, something that can't be destroyed by the chaos of politics or war. But we need to be brave. We need to face the storm head-on, together." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat as she looked into his eyes. She could feel the raw emotion between them, the intensity of their connection pulsing like a heartbeat. "Then let's face it," she said, her voice steady but filled with determination. "Together." In that moment, Evelyn realized that her fear wasn't about the unknown consequences of their love, it was about the possibility of losing it. The connection they shared had become so much a part of who she was, and she wasn't ready to let it go. But with the storm of war on the horizon, she knew that every decision they made from this point on would come with a price. The days following their vow to face the storm together were filled with tension and uncertainty. Evelyn and Asher spent their time preparing for the inevitable clash that would soon take place. The council had given them an ultimatum: sever their bond, or face the consequences. And though Evelyn had no intention of abandoning Asher, the political forces surrounding them were closing in fast. As the tension reached its peak, Evelyn found herself at a crossroads. Every part of her wanted to stay with Asher, to stand by him as he fought for his people and their love. But she knew that the political forces at play were more powerful than anything she could have ever imagined. The Qatari Council was vast, and the loyalty of Asher's own people was divided. If they were to have any hope of surviving, they needed to act quickly and with precision. One evening, after a long day spent strategizing in the hidden caves, Evelyn and Asher sat together on a rocky ledge overlooking the distant valley. The moonlight bathed the landscape in an eerie glow, and the soft hum of Ulaan'Vea's energy fields vibrated in the air around them. Evelyn looked at Asher, her heart heavy with the weight of the decision that loomed over them. "Do you ever wonder if we're doing the right thing? If we're fighting for something that will ultimately tear us apart?" Asher reached for her hand, his grip firm and comforting. "Every day, Evelyn. Every day, I wonder if this will be the end of us. But then I look at you and I know that this fight is worth it. Our love is worth it. We can't let fear decide our fate." She squeezed his hand, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never felt so torn between two worlds before. But in Asher's eyes, she saw a future that was more than just survival. It was a future built on hope, on love, and on the possibility of a united world where the lines between species no longer mattered. "I'm with you, Asher," Evelyn said, her voice steady but full of emotion. "No matter what happens next, I will be with you." Asher smiled softly, his eyes gleaming with affection. "I couldn't ask for anything more, Evelyn. Together, we are unstoppable." The following days brought with them a fierce storm that threatened to engulf everything they had fought for. The Qatari Council, unable to tolerate the growing bond between Evelyn and Asher, took matters into their own hands. They began to gather their forces, preparing for an all-out war that would decide the fate of Ulaan'Vea. As the battle lines were drawn, Evelyn found herself standing at the center of the storm, torn between her love for Asher and her loyalty to her mission. But she knew one thing for certain: she could never abandon Asher. No matter the cost. The war was brutal, and the clashes between the forces of the Council and those who supported Asher and his cause were fierce. Evelyn fought alongside Asher, using everything at her disposal to protect the world she had come to love. But the toll of the conflict weighed heavily on both of them. With each passing day, they lost more friends, more allies, and more hope. As they stood on the front lines, their bodies battered and exhausted, Evelyn and Asher shared a moment of quiet between the chaos. The weight of their situation was clear, but the love they shared remained unshaken. "I can't lose you," Evelyn whispered, her voice strained but full of conviction. "You won't," Asher replied, his silver eyes filled with determination. "No matter what happens, we'll face it together." The war raged on, but through it all, Evelyn and Asher held on to the one thing that mattered most: each other. After what felt like an eternity, the war reached its climax. The Qatari Council, broken and defeated, finally yielded to the overwhelming force of Evelyn and Asher's determination. The love between them had proven stronger than any political division, stronger than any threat they faced. Together, they had fought not only for their love but for a future where their bond could be celebrated, not condemned. As the dust settled, Evelyn stood side by side with Asher, gazing out at the vast horizon of Ulaan'Vea. They had won, but the journey ahead was just beginning. Together, they had forged a new future, one where love could transcend all boundaries. The storm had passed. And now, it was time to rebuild. In the final moment, when the space between us was just a tiny flicker of light in the vast cosmos, I realized one thing: love doesn't need an explanation. Sometimes, the things that defy logic are the things that last forever. And we stayed together, defying every distance. We overcame every challenge, but in the end, I realized that what truly mattered wasn't where he came from, but what he showed me. Love can come from anywhere, and where it will lead us, we're yet to discover. And so, this story ends. Or is it the end of a chapter, or the beginning of an even longer journey? Will someone else continue the story where human hearts meet the universe once more? Is love truly without borders? Will humanity continue searching for love across other worlds, or is it just a dream? Perhaps we'll never know the answer, but at least, together, we've explored it. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, leave a comment to share your thoughts, and be part of our ongoing journey here at Intergalactic Hearts. There's so much more to uncover, and we can't wait to have you along for the ride. Stay tuned, our exploration of love beyond the stars is only beginning.